Have you ever been through a time when fatigue and stress seemed to consume all your energy, to the point where you acted without thinking? At times like these, it is easy to make impulsive decisions that we later regret. The truth is that when we are spiritually exhausted, we become more vulnerable to choices that can take us away from our goals, the people we love, and even God. The story of Moses is a powerful example of this risk. Although he was an extraordinary leader, chosen by God to free the people of Israel, Moses also faced moments of intense exhaustion. In Numbers 20-7-12, we see an episode in which, driven by frustration and fatigue, he acts impulsively. God instructs Moses to speak to a rock so that it would give water to the people. But instead he strikes the rock twice with his staff. This seemingly small act had great consequences, and Moses was prevented from entering the promised land because of this impulsive decision. This teaches us a valuable lesson. Even the strongest and most faithful leaders can succumb to spiritual exhaustion and act outside of God's purpose. When we allow weariness to overwhelm us, our spiritual perception weakens, and we risk reacting thoughtlessly. Moses, who was able to face Pharaoh and lead an entire people through the desert, ended up stumbling in a moment of exhaustion. The story of Moses is a warning to all of us, showing that true strength lies not only in leadership or in the ability to endure, but also in the wisdom to recognize our limitations and seek renewal in God. Moses carried one of the greatest responsibilities ever given to a leader. He was chosen by God to free the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt and lead them toward the Promised Land. From the beginning of this mission, Moses faced constant challenges. He had to confront Pharaoh, cross the Red Sea with a desperate crowd, and lead the people through an arid desert where hunger and thirst tested everyone's faith, including his own. Even with powerful signs and God's constant support, Moses was not immune to the crushing weight of this leadership. Leading a stubborn and often ungrateful people was not an easy task. On several occasions, the people of Israel murmured against him, complained about their conditions, and even wanted to return to Egypt. Moses then found himself under constant pressure to solve problems and mediate conflicts, always seeking provisions that would guarantee the nation's survival. In Numbers 11:14-15, we see Moses pouring out his heart to God, saying, "I cannot support all these people by myself. They are too many for me. If you are going to treat me like this, kill me now." This moment of vulnerability reveals that, even surrounded by miraculous manifestations, the emotional and spiritual weight was beginning to become unbearable. Moses was human, and his exhaustion was palpable. The fatigue that Moses felt was not only physical, but also emotional and spiritual. He was overwhelmed by a responsibility that required not only practical decisions, but constant and unshakable faith. And it is precisely at this point that he becomes vulnerable, showing that, without spiritual renewal, even the most dedicated servant of God can feel on the verge of collapse. The wear and tear, if left untreated, can open the way for impulsive attitudes and hasty decisions. In the middle of the desert, the people of Israel faced one of their greatest challenges, the lack of water. They were thirsty and cried out against Moses, questioning the leadership that had taken them out of Egypt to face so many trials. This was a time of extreme pressure when Moses, worn out by the constant dissatisfaction of the people, needed to once again seek divine guidance. God, in his infinite patience and provision, gave Moses a clear instruction: "Speak to the rock, and enough water would flow from it to satisfy the entire multitude. Divine guidance required from Moses not only obedience, but also calm faith and total trust in the voice of God. Standing before the rock, he would have the opportunity to show the people that even in the most critical moments, God provides in unexpected ways. However, the frustration and weariness accumulated throughout his journey weighed heavily on Moses. In Numbers 20:11, we read that instead of speaking to the rock as God had instructed, Moses struck the rock twice with his staff. He allowed anger and impatience to get the better of him, acting on impulse rather than trusting the simple word of God. This act of disobedience was more than a momentary reaction. It was a reflection of the spiritual and emotional exhaustion that Moses had been experiencing. Moses' decision, though seemingly small, had profound consequences. By striking the rock, he showed the people a distorted image of their relationship with God, as if an act of force or human control were necessary for provision to occur. Moses had missed the opportunity to demonstrate that God works simply and powerfully, without the need for aggression or desperation. When we allow our emotions to take over, we run the risk of deviating from God's purpose. Moses' lesson alerts us to the importance of listening and obeying, even when we are tired, because it is at these times that our faith is truly tested. Just like Moses, we all face moments of deep exhaustion, when patience and persistence seem to slip through our fingers. After facing long journeys, family problems, or periods of intense pressure, fatigue leaves us vulnerable, and it is easy to fall into the trap of hasty decisions. Moses, a strong and faithful leader, ended up succumbing to this exhaustion at a crucial moment in his journey, and his choice to strike the rock instead of speaking to it brought him a high price. Although Moses was a man of faith and led the people of Israel to their liberation, this act of impatience and disobedience prevented him from entering the Promised Land. In Deuteronomy 32 verses 51 to 52, God explains that it was because of this lack of trust and disobedience that Moses would not be allowed to cross the Jordan. He was able to see the Promised Land from afar, but he did not experience the full fulfillment of his journey. Moses' emotional and spiritual exhaustion did not deprive him of the mission God had entrusted to him, but this exhaustion directly affected his ability to make decisions that were aligned with God's will. His mistake may seem small in light of all that he accomplished, but it served to remind us that, even in leadership, there is a line between persevering and going beyond one's own strength. Moses was so focused on the demands of his role that over time, he carried the weight of the people's expectations and complaints without seeking constant spiritual renewal. He endured the complaints, lack of faith, and constant doubts of the people. But in a moment of exhaustion, he allowed his frustration to override God's instruction. The consequences of his impulsive choice reflected not only on his life, but on the destiny of the people of Israel, who would continue their journey under the leadership of Joshua. Fatigue, when not recognized and addressed, can transform small acts into decisions of great consequence. For Moses, the promise was always ahead, but its entry remained only a distant vision. Emotional and spiritual exhaustion have the power to divert us from our purpose, erasing our clarity and weakening our confidence. Recognizing these signs of fatigue is crucial to avoid becoming vulnerable to impulsive decisions. Sometimes it can be the burden of a work that seems to never end, difficulties in our relationships, or the feeling of being alone in our battles. These moments of exhaustion are dangerous because we tend to act rashly, guided more by exhaustion than by reason or faith. However, there is always a path to renewal. Just as Moses found strength in the presence of God, we too can seek spiritual rest in our Creator. In the midst of weariness, God's invitation is clear. He calls us to a place of refuge and restoration. In Psalm 23, we find the promise that the Lord is our shepherd, leading us to green pastures and still waters. These are symbols of a deep and restorative rest that is only possible when we surrender ourselves to God's presence. Even when we feel at our limit, we need to remember that God does not ask us to carry it all alone. Jesus himself invites us in Matthew 11 verse 28. "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." This is a reminder that in God we have a safe place where we can release our worries and recharge our strength. Sometimes all we need to do is pause, take a deep breath, and pray. Prayer, like a refuge, allows us to stop and refocus our minds and hearts. That's where we find the comfort and clarity we need to keep going. When we draw near to God in the midst of our burnout, He renews us, restoring the peace and confidence that has been lost along the way. No matter how challenging the journey may be, remembering that we can find rest in God helps us maintain perspective and continue wisely, even on the hardest days. Moses' attitude in that moment of exhaustion cost him the privilege of seeing the promised land with his own eyes. God told him and Aaron in Numbers 20:12, "Because you did not trust me to sanctify me in the eyes of the Israelites, you will not bring this people into the land I have given them." This was a direct response to Moses' impulsive act, a response that shows us the seriousness of maintaining faith and obedience, especially in times of trial. The weight of spiritual fatigue may be subtle, but its consequences are real. Moses, who had seen so many miracles and had a direct relationship with God, found himself succumbing to a moment of weakness. Even though the promise was near, he did not have the privilege of crossing the Jordan. The fulfillment of the mission was left to Joshua, who led the people to the land they had been seeking for so long. This story is a silent reminder of the importance of seeking renewal when we feel overwhelmed. In Isaiah 40 verse 31, we are reminded that those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. It is a promise that when we turn to God, He restores our ability to continue, even in the face of the deepest weariness. That is why in moments of exhaustion, it is essential to stop and seek this spiritual renewal. Instead of allowing yourself to be overcome by discouragement, find refuge in God and allow Him to strengthen your roots and replenish your faith. Do not let a moment of weakness compromise the promises that are ahead of you. Remember that God has great things prepared, and that remaining steadfast and trusting in Him puts us in tune with what He wants to accomplish in us. If this message brought you clarity, like the video, subscribe to the channel and share it. Help spread this word so that more people can find strength in God and continue steadfastly on their paths, regardless of the challenges they face.